A Moveable Feast, by Ernest Hemingway. Introduction. Imagine for a moment that you are a young writer. You are barely in your 20s, living in a foreign city with your wife and young child. For years, you have poured every spare moment, every ounce of your soul, into your craft. You've written stories, poems, even the start of a novel. It is your entire life's work, the physical proof of your ambition, all neatly packed into a single suitcase. One day, your wife, wanting to surprise you, packs all of it, the original typed pages, the backups, everything, into that suitcase to bring to you while you're on a work trip. She leaves the suitcase on the train for just a moment, and when she returns, it's gone. Stolen. Years of work, vanished in an instant. How do you recover from that? Where do you find the strength to start over from nothing? This is not the opening of a tragic novel. It is a true story, a pivotal moment in the life of a young Ernest Hemingway. And the book we are going to explore today, A Moveable Feast, is in many ways the answer to that question. Published after his death, this is Hemingway's beautiful and often brutal memoir of those early years in 1920s Paris. It is a look back at a time when he and his first wife, Hadley, were, in his own words, very poor and very happy. But this book is so much more than a simple memoir. It's a love letter to a city, a masterclass in the discipline of creativity, and a cautionary tale about the temptations that come with art and ambition. It's a guidebook for anyone who has ever dreamed of creating something meaningful, of living a life rich in experience, even if your pockets are empty. So, settle in, because over the next few minutes, I'm going to share with you the lessons Hemingway learned in the cafes, galleries, and cold-water flats of Paris. By the end of our time together, you will understand the profound power of what he called good discipline, the unexpected gift of hunger, and the secret to building a life so rich with memory and meaning that, no matter where you go, it stays with you, like a movable feast. Book summary. For the young Ernest Hemingway, just back from the war and determined to make his way as a writer, Paris in the 1920s was not a glamorous city of lights. It was a city of cold winds, gray skies, and the constant, gnawing presence of poverty. He and his wife Hadley lived in a small, two-room flat over a sawmill, with no hot water and a toilet that was little more than a bucket. Some days, money was so tight that he would pretend to have a lunch meeting, and instead spend the afternoon walking through the Luxembourg Gardens, fighting off a hollow hunger. And yet, this is the period of his life he would look back on with the deepest love, because he discovered a powerful secret, one that would shape him as a writer and as a man. He learned that hardship, when faced with discipline, is not a curse, it's a tool. He famously wrote, "Hunger was good discipline." And he meant it. When he walked through the city on an empty stomach, his senses were sharpened. The smell of bread from the bakeries was more intense. The paintings in the museum seemed clearer, more vibrant. He felt that he could understand the painter Cézanne on a deeper level, wondering if the artist, too, had been hungry when he painted, or if he'd simply forgotten to eat, lost in his work. Hunger taught him to see, to feel, and to appreciate the simplest pleasures with an intensity that comfort could never provide. His work was not a matter of waiting for inspiration. It was a ritual, a job like any other, demanding commitment and routine. His needs were simple: a blue-back notebook, 2 sharp pencils, and a marble-top table at a quiet cafe. He would arrive early in the morning, order a single café crème, and work for hours as the waiters swept the floors around him. He developed a set of rules for himself, a code for his craft. The most important rule was this: always stop for the day when you know what is going to happen next. That way, he explained, your subconscious could work on it overnight, and you would never face the terror of a blank page in the morning. You could always be sure of going on the next day. And if he did get stuck, if the words wouldn't come, he had a simple, powerful mantra. All you have to do is write one true sentence. Write the truest sentence that you know. It could be something he had seen, or heard, or felt. A simple, declarative sentence, stripped of all ornament. And from that one true thing, a whole story could be built. The work was slow, difficult, and often lonely, but the reward was a feeling unlike any other. After finishing a story, he would feel both empty and happy, as though I had made love. And in those moments, with a little money from a newspaper article he'd written for a paper in Toronto, he could afford a simple, perfect luxury. He would walk to a clean, friendly cafe, order a dozen cold, salty oysters and a half carafe of dry white wine. As he ate, the metallic taste of the sea washed away by the crisp wine, the empty feeling would leave him, replaced by a profound sense of happiness and accomplishment. It was in these moments that he felt on top of the world, making plans to travel, to write more, to live fully. But Paris was more than just a place to work in solitude. It was his university. He learned as much from walking its streets as he did from any book. He would wander along the quay of the Seine, watching the fishermen with their long cane poles, who, contrary to the belief of tourists, were serious and skilled, often catching delicious little fish called goujon for their families. He'd browse the bookstalls, where you could sometimes find recently published American books sold for a few francs, discarded by wealthy travelers and sold by hotel valets. His real education, however, came from two very different places. The first was the Musée du Luxembourg, where the great Impressionist paintings were then housed. He went there nearly every day to study the work of Cézanne, Manet, and Monet. He realized that these painters weren't just capturing a scene, they were building it, giving it dimension and weight. He wrote that he was learning something from the painting of Cézanne that made writing simple true sentences far from enough. He wanted to put that same sense of dimension into his stories, a secret he was not yet articulate enough to explain to anyone. His other classroom was a small, warm, and cheerful bookshop on the Rue de l'Odéon, Shakespeare and Company. It was run by a kind, endlessly generous American woman named Sylvia Beach. The first time he walked in, he was shy and didn't have enough money to pay the deposit for the rental library. Sylvia simply made him out a card and told him to pay whenever he could, trusting him completely. That bookshop became his lifeline. It gave him access to a world of literature he could never have afforded to buy. It was there he discovered the great Russian writers, Turgenev, Tolstoy, Dostoevsky, who would become his silent mentors. He would take a stack of books back to his cold flat, feeling as though he had been given a great treasure. He and Hadley would read for hours, and when they traveled to the mountains of Austria to escape the Parisian winter, the books came with them, opening up another wonderful world to live in at night, after a long day of skiing in the snow and the forests. Paris in the 1920s was also a city of giants, a place where the currents of modern art and literature converged. And a young, unknown writer like Hemingway found himself, improbably, in the center of it all. His first and most formidable mentor was Gertrude Stein. Her studio at 27 Rue de Flores was the opposite of his own poor flat. It was a large, warm room with a big fireplace, filled with museum-quality paintings by Picasso and other modern masters. To a young man who was learning to see from painters, it was like the finest museum in the world. Miss Stein, a heavily built woman with beautiful eyes and a powerful presence, would hold court, talking endlessly about people, places, and art. She and her companion served fragrant, homemade liqueurs and treated Hemingway and his wife like very good, well-mannered and promising children. Stein became his teacher. She read his stories and gave him harsh, direct criticism. She famously told him that one of his best early stories, Up in Michigan, was inapproachable, a word from the art world meaning unhangable. It was good, she said, but it was too explicit, too raw. No one would publish it. You mustn't write anything that is inapproachable, she insisted. There is no point in it. It's wrong and it's silly. She also gave him practical advice. You can either buy clothes or buy pictures, she told him. No one who is not very rich can do both. It was a lesson in priorities that resonated with Hemingway, who was already choosing art over comfort. For a long time, their friendship was a source of warmth and knowledge, but it ended strangely. One day, he arrived at her studio to say goodbye before she left on a trip, and from an upstairs room, he overheard a conversation so raw and personal, so disturbing, that he simply turned and left, unable to face her. It was a sudden, confusing end to a relationship that had shaped him, a reminder that even the most brilliant minds have their own hidden, complicated worlds. A very different kind of mentor was Ezra Pound. If Stein's studio was rich, Pound's was poor. He was, in Hemingway's eyes, the most generous and disinterested writer he had ever known. Pound was a whirlwind of energy and eccentric projects, always helping other artists he believed in, whether they were poets, painters, or sculptors. He was kind, sincere in his mistakes, and so devoted to others that Hemingway thought of him as a sort of saint. Pound's great project at the time was a movement he called Bel Esprit. The goal was to raise money from fellow artists to get the great poet T.S. Eliot a job outside of the London bank where he worked, so he would have more time to write poetry. Hemingway campaigned enthusiastically for the cause, dreaming of the day they could stride into the bank and free Major Eliot, as he jokingly called him. The plan eventually fell apart, but it was a perfect example of Pound's selfless, if sometimes impractical, devotion to art. He was a true friend, a man who taught Hemingway to distrust adjectives and to value precision, even if, as Pound once admitted, he'd never read the Rushians. But perhaps the most significant and tragic relationship from this period was with F. Scott Fitzgerald. When they first met, Fitzgerald was already a literary star, the voice of the jazz age. Hemingway was a complete unknown. Scott, who looked like a boy with a face between handsome and pretty, immediately launched into a long, embarrassing speech about how great Hemingway's writing was. Then, a strange thing happened. As Fitzgerald sat at the bar, his face seemed to tighten, the puffiness draining away until it looked like a death's head, the color of used candle wax. Hemingway was terrified, thinking he was watching the man die. But Fitzgerald's friend assured him it was just the way it takes him. It was Hemingway's first glimpse into the profound sickness that lay beneath Fitzgerald's charm. He soon saw more. He agreed to take a trip with Scott to Lyon to retrieve a car they had abandoned. The trip was a disaster. Scott missed the train, and when they finally met, he was convinced he was dying of congestion of the lungs after getting caught in the rain in their roofless car. He spent an entire evening in a hotel room, morbidly planning for his own death, demanding a thermometer, and looking like a little dead crusader. Hemingway quickly learned that Scott was a man of two minds. When sober, he was intelligent, charming, funny, and a deeply loyal friend. But alcohol transformed him. It didn't just make him drunk, it unleashed a deep well of insecurity and poison. The source of much of that poison was his wife, Zelda. Hemingway describes her with hawk's eyes and a deep-seated jealousy of Scott's work. He saw a destructive pattern. Whenever Scott would commit to working and staying sober, Zelda would complain of boredom and lure him out to another all-night party, derailing his progress. Scott, deeply in love with her and terrified of losing her, would follow. Yet, through all this chaos, Scott managed to write The Great Gatsby. When Hemingway read it, he knew instantly that he was in the presence of greatness. He wrote, "When I had finished the book, I knew that no matter what Scott did, nor how he behaved, I must know it was like a sickness and be of any help I could to him and try to be a good friend." He saw that beneath the wreckage, Scott's talent was as natural as the pattern that was made by the dust on a butterfly's wings. But the sickness was winning. Years later, Scott confessed to Hemingway the deepest source of his insecurity. Zelda had told him that, due to his physical measurements, he could never make any woman happy. This single, cruel remark had shattered his confidence. Hemingway, in a moment of true friendship, took him to the bathroom at the restaurant to check, and then to the Louvre to look at the classical statues, trying to convince him it was a lie designed to put you out of business. It was a heartbreaking scene, revealing the terrible fragility of a man who, to the world, seemed to have everything. The Paris that Hemingway chronicles in A Moveable Feast is not a place that can last forever. It is a snapshot of a particular time in life, a time of intense focus, profound love, and the pure joy of creation. The book is, in its final pages, an elegy for the end of that time. The end did not come with a single, dramatic event, but with a slow infiltration. First, the arrival of the rich. They came with their easy charm and their pilot fish, friends who scouted out the next sure thing, the artist who was about to become famous. They brought with them a fiesta concept of life, where every day was a party, a distraction that was seductive but deadly to a writer's discipline. Hemingway writes with bitterness about how these charming, generous, and ultimately nourishing people could leave everything deader than the roots of any grass Attila's horse's hooves have ever scoured. At the same time, another person entered their lives, an unmarried young woman who became Hadley's best friend and moved in with the couple. Hemingway describes, with brutal honesty, how this arrangement, which starts from innocence, slowly and unrelentingly becomes a trap. He writes, "You get to love them both. Then, instead of the two of them and their child, there are three of them." He admits, "You lie and hate it and it destroys you, and every day is more dangerous, but you live day to day as in a war." The perfect, simple happiness of the early years was gone. The first part of Paris was over. He recalls returning to his wife and son in the mountains of Austria after a trip to New York. He saw Hadley standing by the train tracks, her hair red gold in the sun, smiling beautifully. "And in that moment," he writes, "I wished I had died before I ever loved anyone but her." It is a devastating admission of his own failure and a testament to the pure love that he had lost. The book ends not with bitterness, but with a beautiful, philosophical acceptance. He recognizes that the Paris of his youth is gone, because he himself has changed. But the memory of it, the lessons learned and the happiness felt, remains. And that is the ultimate meaning of the title, taken from a line he wrote to a friend: "If you are lucky enough to have lived in Paris as a young man, then wherever you go for the rest of your life, it stays with you. For Paris is a movable feast." The feast is not the city itself. It is the wealth of experience, the discipline of hard work, the memory of love, and the clarity that comes from hunger. It is everything you gather inside yourself during those formative, difficult, and wonderful years, a source of nourishment you can draw upon for the rest of your life. Commentary. Reading A Moveable Feast is like being given a key to a lost world. It's not just the world of 1920s Paris, with its famous artists and smoky cafes. It's the inner world of a young person discovering their own power, forging their identity through discipline, and experiencing a kind of pure happiness that often only comes when you have nothing to lose. The most powerful lesson, for me, is Hemingway's idea of good discipline. In our world of instant gratification and endless distraction, the thought of sitting alone for hours, wrestling with a single true sentence, feels almost radical. He reminds us that true creative work isn't a flash of inspiration. It's a daily, grinding, and deeply rewarding practice. It's about showing up, especially on the days you don't feel like it, and trusting that the work itself will teach you what you need to know. And his perspective on poverty is just as profound. He doesn't romanticize it, he's clear about the cold and the hunger. But he frames it as a sharpener. It stripped away the non-essential and forced him to focus on what truly mattered: his work, his love for his wife, and the sensory details of the world around him. It's a powerful reminder that sometimes, our greatest strengths are forged in our moments of greatest constraint. So, how can we apply these lessons to our own lives, even if we're not aspiring writers in Paris? Here are a few simple ideas. First, find your café. This isn't about the coffee. It's about finding a sacred space for your deep work. It could be a library, a park bench, or just your own desk an hour before anyone else wakes up. A place where you can be alone with your thoughts, free from the noise of the world, and practice your craft, whatever it may be. Second, write your one true sentence. This is a beautiful metaphor for starting small and being honest. Whatever project you're facing, a business plan, a piece of code, a difficult conversation, begin with the simplest, truest element. Don't try to be brilliant or impressive. Just state one true thing and build from there. The clarity and momentum you gain from that simple act can be astonishing. And finally, cultivate your own movable feast. Pay attention to the world around you. Appreciate the simple pleasures: a good meal, a walk in the rain, a conversation with a friend. Read widely. Learn from others. Fill your mind and your heart with experiences that will nourish you for years to come. Because life will inevitably take you to different places, and you will change in ways you can't yet imagine. But the feast you carry inside you, that will be yours forever. That was a summary of A Moveable Feast by Ernest Hemingway. We've certainly touched on the core of its wisdom today, but I'll be honest with you, a summary can only ever be a map. The real treasure is found when you walk the territory yourself. The true magic of this book lies in the quiet moments, when one of Hemingway's perfectly crafted sentences lands in a way you didn't expect, or a story about his struggles suddenly illuminates your own. This summary is meant to be a signpost, to help you decide if this journey is one you want to take. If anything we've talked about has sparked something in you, I encourage you to pick up a copy. Reading it isn't just about learning. It's an experience that can genuinely change how you see your own past, your present work, and the life you hope to build. You can find a link to the book in the description below. Also, if you've found this journey valuable, please take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe to Billionaire's Bookshelf. It tells us we're on the right track and ensures you won't miss our next exploration into another life-changing book. Let's keep learning and growing together.